Linda, and this is Coffee and Crime. This podcast explores real cases involving violence, loss, and the darker side of human nature. Some details may be confronting. Listener discretion is strongly advised. When people talk about the Lynette Dawson case, they often focus on one thing: the fact there was no body. For decades, that single fact seemed to protect Chris Dawson from ever facing a murder charge. No crime scene, no remains, no confession. Just a missing woman and a growing list of suspicions. But when the case finally reached court in 2022, the prosecution didn't need a body. Instead, they built something else: a picture. A picture made up of witness statements, diary entries, family observations, timelines, contradictions, and behaviour stretching back more than 40 years. In this bonus episode, we're looking at some of the lesser-known details that helped to convince Justice Ian Harrison beyond a reasonable doubt that Lynette Dawson was in fact murdered, and why one of the most important witnesses in the entire case never actually testified, because she had died years before the trial even began. Yet her words still helped to convict a killer. Lynette's mother, Helena Simms, kept diaries. Not because she expected them to become evidence. Not because she thought they would one day help to solve a murder. She simply documented family life. Visits, conversations, worries, arguments, observations. The ordinary details people write down every day. But what makes Helena's diary entries so extraordinary is that they captured events as they happened. Not years later, not after media coverage, not after memories had already faded. They were real-time records of a family slowly falling apart. One diary entry described Chris Dawson comforting Joanne Curtis while Lynette was elsewhere. Another recorded Lynette returning home upset and close to tears. The diaries painted a picture of a marriage under immense strain. Years later, Justice Harrison would describe Helena's writings as a remarkably detailed commentary on events unfolding at the time. In many ways, Helena had become an accidental witness, a witness whose observations had been preserved in ink. One of the most revealing periods in the evidence was Christmas 1981, just weeks before Lynette supposedly disappeared. According to witnesses and diary entries, Chris Dawson was becoming increasingly focused on Joanne Curtis. He reportedly attempted to leave Lynette more than once. At one stage, he packed his belongings and headed north to Queensland with Joanne. The relationship was no longer hidden. Family members could see it. Friends could see it. Even Lynette's mother could see it. In a heartbreaking letter, Helena described it as the saddest Christmas she had ever experienced. She wrote that Lynette wanted Chris to see a doctor because she couldn't understand why he had become so angry with her. It's a small detail, but it reveals something important. Even at the end, Lynette still appeared to be trying to save her marriage. One fact that often gets overlooked is the day before Lynette disappeared, she and Chris attended marriage counselling. According to the evidence heard during the trial, the session appeared positive. Witnesses recalled seeing the pair holding hands afterwards. Lynette told colleagues that the counselling had gone well. Think about that for a moment. If Lynette was secretly planning to abandon her children and disappear forever, why attend marriage counselling? Why speak positively about the session? Why behave as though she was working on the relationship? The court ultimately concluded that her behaviour was completely inconsistent with someone who was preparing to walk away from her life. For decades, Chris Dawson maintained that Lynette contacted him after she disappeared. He claimed that she needed time away, that she didn't want contact. She was starting a new life. But there was a problem. Nobody else had heard from her. Not friends, not her family, not her daughters, and not her mother. The court found it was unbelievable that a woman supposedly leaving because of a marital problem would continue communicating only with the husband that she was trying to escape. Justice Harrison ultimately rejected the alleged phone calls entirely, finding that there was no truth to the story. And once those calls disappeared from the timeline, something else disappeared too. The explanation for where Lynette had gone. One of the biggest obstacles facing investigators was a number of reported sightings of Lynette after she disappeared. Over the years, people claimed that they had seen her at shopping centres, on the street, in different parts of Sydney. For a long time, these reports created uncertainty. Because if Lynette had been seen after January 1982, then perhaps she really had left voluntarily. Perhaps she had started a new life. Perhaps everyone was wrong. But when investigators began examining those sightings closely, the picture started to change. Human memory is fragile, especially when decades have passed. People can become convinced that they saw someone when in reality they are remembering fragments, a face, a conversation, a moment that no longer exists exactly as they recall it. The court spent a good amount of time examining many of the alleged sightings, and one by one they became less convincing. Some contained inconsistencies, others relied on memories formed many years after the fact, and some appeared to have been influenced by publicity surrounding the case. Eventually, Justice Harrison concluded that none of the sightings provided reliable evidence that Lynette was alive after January 1982. It was a crucial finding, because every sighting that fell away removed another possible explanation. If Lynette wasn't being seen around Sydney, then where was she? And if she wasn't alive, then what happened to her? Perhaps one of the most disturbing aspects of the case is how quickly life appeared to move on after Lynette vanished. Because within days, Joanne Curtis was living in the family home. The teenage student who had already become central to the marriage breakdown was now helping care for Lynette's children, sleeping in her bed, occupying the space Lynette had occupied only days earlier. For investigators, this wasn't proof of murder, but it became part of a larger pattern. A pattern that suggested that Chris Dawson's desired future was already taking shape almost immediately after Lynette disappeared. When investigators look at suspicious disappearances, they often focus on a simple question. How did the people closest to the missing person react? There's no perfect way to grieve, no correct way to behave. People process shock differently. Some become emotional, others appear detached. But investigators are trained to look for patterns. And in the Lynette Dawson case, many witnesses described behaviour they found difficult to reconcile with a husband whose wife had simply vanished. There were no large-scale public appeals, no sustained campaign to locate Lynette, no obvious urgency that might be expected if a mother of two had disappeared without warning. Instead, family members described the situation where explanations appeared quickly. Lynette had joined a religious group. She needed space. She didn't want contact. She was starting over. The explanations changed over time, but the outcome remained the same. Lynette was always somewhere else, always unavailable, and always impossible to verify. For investigators, this became significant because every version of events depended on one thing: believing that Lynette had chosen to leave. Once the court rejected that possibility, many of those explanations collapsed with it. And what remained was a woman who vanished without warning, without preparation, and without any confirmed contact ever again. Throughout the trial, one issue kept resurfacing. Would Lynette Dawson really abandon her children? Friends said no, the family said no, her mother said no, and decades later, the judge agreed. The evidence showed a devoted mother, a woman who was deeply attached to her daughters, a woman making plans for the future. Nothing about her behaviour suggested that she was preparing to vanish forever. Yet that is exactly what Chris Dawson claimed happened. The court simply didn't believe it. One question continues to frustrate many people who follow this case. If the suspicions existed for so many years, why did it take nearly 4 decades for a murder charge to be laid? The answer lies in one of the most difficult realities of criminal law. Suspicion is not evidence. Police may believe that a crime occurred, families may believe a crime occurred, and the public may believe that a crime occurred. But prosecutors must prove it. And proving murder without a body is extremely difficult. There is no forensic scene to analyse, no remains to examine, no cause of death to establish. Every piece of evidence must be built through witness testimony, timelines, behaviour, and circumstantial facts. For years, authorities simply did not believe that they had enough. But that changed after the Teacher's Pet podcast was released. Witnesses came forward, evidence was reassessed, and investigators built a clearer picture of Lynette's final weeks. The eventual prosecution became one of the most significant no-body murder cases in Australian legal history. Not because it was easy, but because it demonstrated that a body is not always necessary to establish the truth. But even with a conviction, the case still remains incomplete, because Lynette Dawson has never been found. Somewhere there is still a missing final chapter, a location, a burial site, a place where answers remain hidden. For her daughters, her family, and everyone who spent decades searching for the truth, that absence remains. The court established what happened, but not where. And until Lynette is found, one of Australia's most famous true crime cases will always carry an unanswered question. Where did she go? More than 40 years after Lynette Dawson disappeared, her mother's diaries remain one of the most powerful pieces of evidence in this case. Words written privately, thoughts never intended for a courtroom. Yet decades later, they helped to tell a story Lynette could no longer tell herself. And while justice may have finally arrived, the search for Lynette Dawson is still not over. Not every case finds closure. Not every question gets answered. And sometimes the truth stays buried long after the headlines fade. This has been Coffee and Crime AU. For deeper into the case, visit Coffee and Crime AU online. Until next time.